The lights inside the packed arena pulsed like lightning bolts, illuminating a sea of ecstatic faces. 18,000 voices merged into one unstoppable roar as Freddie Mercury, drenched in sweat and glory, strutted across the stage with a confidence that seemed almost otherworldly. He had just finished leading the crowd through a thunderous version of Radio GAGA, their hands still tingling from the synchronized claps that shook the rafters. The energy in the building wasn't just high, it was volcanic, and at the center of it all was Freddie, in his trademark white tank top, tight jeans, and that unmistakable crown of dark, sweat-slicked hair. His chest heaved with adrenaline, his eyes flashing with the playful danger of a man who lived for the stage. He paced toward the piano, then swerved back to the microphone with feline grace, whipping the crowd into even greater hysteria with just a raised eyebrow and a smirk. The band behind him, Brian May, Roger Taylor, John Deacon, pushed out a wall of sound so powerful you feel in your ribs. Queen wasn't just performing. They were detonating. But in the middle of that perfect storm of music and ecstasy, something happened. It started faintly, barely noticeable beneath the avalanche of sound. A single voice, slurred, ragged, and jarringly out of rhythm, rose from somewhere in the middle section of the crowd. "Oi, Freddie, you bloody fraud." At first, hardly anyone paid attention. In a crowd of nearly 20,000, it wasn't unusual to hear random shouts or drunken cheers. Freddie himself was used to it. He'd spent his entire career commanding arenas full of chaos. But this voice didn't disappear. It cut through, louder this time, carried by alcohol and rage. "You ain't nothing but a poser. Prove you're a real man." The insult ripped across the arena like a needle tearing through vinyl. The music stopped dead. Freddie, mid-gesture, froze. The band faltered, their instruments trailing into silence. In the blink of an eye, the party atmosphere evaporated into tension, so sharp it could slice glass. 18,000 heads turned toward the disturbance. There he was, a man in his mid-30s, tall, broad-shouldered, his shirt half untucked, his face flushed crimson with drink. He stood in his row, swaying slightly, gripping a half-empty beer cup like it was a weapon. His eyes blazed with reckless bravado. The people around him shifted uncomfortably, muttering under their breath, some hissing at him to shut up, but he only grew louder, bolder. "Come on then, Mercury. You prance about in your tight pants, strutting like a queen. Why don't you show us if you got any real guts?" A low murmur swept through the crowd. Some people gasped. Others laughed nervously. A few jeered back at the heckler, their voices dripping with contempt. But the overall energy of the arena had changed. Where a moment ago there had been unison, thousands of strangers singing as one. Now there was fracture, tension, uncertainty. All eyes shifted to Freddie. For a long moment, he didn't move. He stood there, framed in the spotlight, microphone still in his hand, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. His eyes locked onto the source of the voice, sharp and unblinking. Security guards, trained to respond to situations like this, began moving quickly toward the man section. A ripple of relief swept through the audience. They expected this would be over in a matter of seconds. The drunk would be dragged out. The music would resume, and the memory would be shrugged off as just another footnote in a wild night. But then Freddie did something nobody expected. He raised a hand. The gesture was small, but the entire arena caught it. A silent command. The guards froze mid-step, exchanging uncertain glances. "No," Freddie said into the microphone, his voice amplified so clearly it rolled across the venue like thunder. "Leave him." The crowd erupted in confused murmurs. "Leave him? Why?" Freddie took a slow step toward the edge of the stage, his eyes never leaving the heckler. He tilted his head, his lips curling into a sly, dangerous smile. Well, he purred, his accent crisp, his tone both mocking and amused. "Looks like we got ourselves a critic in the house tonight." The audience laughed, nervously at first, then louder, grateful for the release of tension. Freddie had always known how to control a room, and humor was one of his sharpest weapons. He wielded it now with surgical precision, easing the crowd just enough to keep them on edge without letting the moment dissolve. The heckler wasn't laughing. "Don't you mock me," he shouted back, voice hoarse but insistent. "I said, prove you're a man, Mercury. All that strutting. He jabbed a finger toward the stage. All that nonsense. It's just an act. The grin slid from Freddie's face. His eyes narrowed. For the first time, there was no trace of humor, only steel. The arena went silent again. The laughter cut short as if someone had slammed a door. You could almost hear the collective breath being held. Freddie raised a microphone slowly, deliberately. "You've paid good money to be here tonight," he said, his voice calm, even, just like everyone else. "So why don't you sit down, shut up, and enjoy the music like a civilized human being?" The crowd erupted in applause, stomping and cheering in support. Thousands of fans turned on the heckler, booing and hissing, telling him to leave. The balance of power seemed restored. But the man wasn't done. "No, I don't want your music," he bellowed, his words slurring but his aggression sharp. "I want to see if you're anything more than a little fairy boy prancing around for cameras." A gasp tore through the arena. The insult was cruel, personal, and it landed with the weight of a sledgehammer. Freddie's jaw tightened. His lips pressed into a thin line. For a flicker of a moment, his usually unshakable composure wavered. The words hit him, because they weren't just aimed at him as a performer, but as a man who had spent his entire life navigating judgment, ridicule, whispers about who he was and how he lived. The crowd was restless now, caught between outrage and suspense. Security hovered at the edge of the section, unsure whether to act. And then, slowly, Freddie smiled again. But this time it wasn't playful. It was dangerous. A smile that promised something unexpected. He stepped forward, closer to the edge of the stage, his gaze burning into drunk fan like a laser. "You want me to prove myself?" he asked, his voice low but carrying, every syllable dripping with command. "You think I'm a fraud? A poser?" The man sneered, emboldened by the attention. "Damn right I do." The audience leaned in, the entire arena holding its collective breath. Freddie straightened, microphone in one hand, his other hand resting casually on his hip. He looked every inch the rock god he was, untouchable, commanding, untamed. "Then come closer, darling," he said, his voice suddenly sharp as a whip. "Let's see what you've got." The arena erupted into chaos, cheers, screams, gasps. Security looked to Freddie for confirmation, but he was already moving, pointing at the heckler, daring him forward. And just like that, the stage was set, not for a fight, but for a confrontation the likes of which nobody in that arena would ever forget. If you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. For a few long, trembling seconds, the arena seemed to hang in midair, suspended between awe and disbelief. Freddie Mercury, rock's untouchable showman, had just invited a drunk, red-faced heckler to come closer. It wasn't the response anyone had expected. The heckler blinked, caught off guard by Freddie's brazen invitation. For a moment he just stood there, beer sloshing his trembling cup, eyes darting left and right, as though realizing thousands of strangers were now staring directly at him. Some shouted for security to drag him out. Others cursed at him, but their voices only seemed to feed his drunken bravado. He puffed up his chest, ran a hand through his sweat-soaked hair, and shouted back toward the stage. "Damn right I'll come closer. You think you're some kind of king? You ain't nothing but a poser in makeup and tights." Gasps erupted from the audience. The insult carried heavy weight, cutting not only at Freddie's flamboyant image, but at the very core of who he was. This was the late 1970s, an era when masculinity was still a fortress guarded with fists and ridicule. Freddie's fearless performances, his makeup, his costumes, his unapologetic sensuality, challenged those walls every night. And now, in front of 18,000 people, one man had hurled the kind of slur Freddie had been hearing in shadows his whole life. For a heartbeat, Freddie stood still, the insult reverberating in the cavernous arena. His chest rose and fell in a slow rhythm, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the heckler. He could have ordered security to end it right then. He could have mocked the man into silence or ignored him entirely. But Freddie Mercury was not built for silence. With feline grace, he moved forward, closer to the stage's edge, until the spotlight framed him like a figure carved in marble. He placed one hand dramatically on his hip, the microphone in the other. His lips curled into a smirk that was equal parts regal and venomous. "Oh, darling," he said, his voice purring to the sound system. "If I wanted lessons in masculinity, I'd hardly take them from a man who can't even hold his beer upright." The crowd erupted. Laughter, cheers, applause exploding like fireworks. The heckler's swagger faltered for a moment as those words, razor-sharp and dripping with contempt, landed squarely on his chest. He scowled, gritting his teeth, and raised his voice to compete with the roar of the crowd. "You think you're better than me, huh?" he shouted, spittle flying. "You think prancing around in your little outfits makes you a man? Try being a real one. Try fighting for something instead of strutting around like some fairy boy." The arena hissed in outrage. Boos and shouts thundered down on the heckler, fans yelling, "Get out!" and "Shut up!" Some people looked genuinely shaken. Others looked furious, standing from their seats as though ready to march toward him themselves. Freddie let the noise rise, let the tension stretch to its breaking point. Then, slowly, he lifted a hand, and the crowd, astonishingly, obeyed. The arena quieted, as if it cast a spell over 18,000 people. "Listen to me, my little critic," Freddie said, his tone turning sharp. "You came here tonight not for the music, not for the joy, not for the love. You came here to throw stones. But tell me," he leaned closer into the microphone, his voice dropping to a near whisper that still echoed through the speakers, "what is it you're really so afraid of?" The heckler blinked, startled by the sudden turn. His bravado wavered, but the alcohol and the weight of all those eyes pushed him forward. "I'm not afraid of nothing," he snarled. "I just don't buy your act. You think singing and wearing tights makes you better than a man who works with his hands." Freddie's smirk widened. He straightened his shoulders, towering in charisma if not in height, and replied, "Oh, sweetheart, I never said I was better. But I do know this. I'd rather prance in tights than stumble through life in chains of my own bitterness." The crowd roared again, a tidal wave of sound crashing down on the heckler. Some leapt to their feet, clapping and cheering. Others pointed and jeered at the man, who flushed deep red, his drunken confidence beginning to look more like cornered panic. Still, he pressed on, shouting over the storm, "Prove it then! Prove you're a real man." The challenge rang out clear, echoing like a gunshot in the hushed arena that followed. Freddie tilted his head back and laughed, a rich, rolling laugh that filled every corner of the space. Then, as if addressing not just the heckler, but every person in the building, he said, "You want me to prove myself? Darling, I prove myself every single night I walk on this stage." The audience erupted in approval, clapping, stomping, chanting his name. But Freddie wasn't done. He turned back toward the heckler, eyes glinting with both mischief and fire. "Still not enough for you? Fine." He pointed his microphone toward the man like a dueling pistol. "If you think you've got the courage, why didn't you come up here and you prove yourself? Show us all what a real man sounds like." The arena gasped. It was the last thing anyone expected. Invite the heckler up? Onto the sacred ground of Queen's stage? Security guards moved instantly, shaking their heads, muttering to each other. Brian May shot Freddie a look of disbelief from across the stage, his guitar hanging forgotten at his side. Roger Taylor, behind the drum kit, mouthed, "Are you insane?" But Freddie was immovable. His hand gestured sharply. Let him come. The heckler froze, the weight of the invitation settling in. His drunken grin flickered with doubt. Thousands of eyes bore into him. The path to the stage seemed impossibly long. Yet his pride, twisted by drink and ego, wouldn't let him back down. "Fine," he shouted, puffing out his chest. "You'll regret this." He shoved past the people in his row, stumbling down the aisle toward the stage, sloshing beer across his shirt. The crowd jeered and booed, some reaching out to smack his arm, others snapping photos with their disposable cameras. Freddie stood still, waiting, microphone lowered, the spotlight following his every breath. As the man drew closer, Freddie turned slightly, speaking into the microphone once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his tone now grand, theatrical, echoing to the rafters, "tonight we welcome a very special guest. He thinks he knows what makes a man. Let's give him the chance to show us, shall we? The audience exploded into a mixture of cheers, laughter, and boos. The tension was unbearable, the suspense palpable. The heckler reached the foot of the stage. Security stood tense, ready to intervene at the slightest sign from Freddie. But Freddie waved them back again. He crouched slightly, extending one manicured hand toward the drunk man, as though inviting him into a dance. "Come along, darling," he said, his smile sharp and gleaming. "The spotlight's waiting for you." And as the man clumsily grabbed Freddie's hand and hoisted himself onto the stage, 18,000 people held their breath. Nobody knew what was about to happen. Not the crowd, not the band, perhaps not even Freddie himself. All they knew was that something unforgettable was unfolding, something that would either end in chaos or in one of the most remarkable moments of Queen's legendary career. The arena was chaos. 18,000 fans stood on their feet, craning their necks, gasping, shouting, some pleading for security to intervene. They had come for a Queen concert, for soaring choruses and flashing lights, not for the sight of a drunk, belligerent man staggering toward the stage like a bull charging red cloth. But this wasn't just any stage. This was Freddie Mercury's domain, his kingdom, his cathedral. And Freddie wasn't about to surrender it. The heckler clambered up clumsily with Freddie's help, almost falling as his foot slipped against the polished edge. For one dizzying moment, it looked as if he would crash backward into the pit, but Freddie's grip tightened and pulled him up with surprising strength. The audience gasped, then roared, half in horror, half in disbelief that this was actually happening. And then they stood together. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Freddie, dazzling under the spotlight, sweat gleaming on his forehead, every inch the rock god. And beside him the heckler, rumpled, red-faced, shirt untucked and stained, his chest heaving with drunken pride and fear. Freddie released his hand and stepped back, microphone in one hand, his other hand casually resting on his hip. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes glittered with dangerous delight. "Well, darling," he said, his voice purring to the speakers, "here you are, center stage. All these lovely people watching you. Tell us what's your name." The heckler blinked, suddenly aware of the thousands of eyes fixed on him. He straightened, trying to regain some sense of authority. My name's Dave," he muttered, his voice slurred but loud enough to echo through the mic Freddie held toward him. The crowd erupted in laughter. Some jeered, some cheered sarcastically. "Go on, Dave. Show us, Dave." Freddie arched an eyebrow, smiling like a cat toying with a cornered mouse. "Well, Dave," he said, "you've interrupted my little soiree this evening. So clearly you have something very important to share with us. Tell me, darling, what exactly did you come here to prove?" Dave puffed his chest again, emboldened by the attention, though his eyes darted nervously at the sea of faces glaring back at him. "I came to prove," he slurred, "that you're just a pretender. All this," he gestured wildly at Freddie, at the glittering stage, at the screaming fans, "all this is just smoke and mirrors. You don't know what it means to be a real man." A hush fell over the arena, broken only by a few scattered boos. Freddie tilted his head, studying him. Then, with a sly smile, he replied, "A real man, And what, pray tell, is your definition, Dave? Shouting at strangers while spilling lager on yourself? That seems rather uninspired." The crowd exploded with laughter. Dave's face flushed crimson. "Don't mock me," he barked, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Freddie, sensing the shift, moved in for the kill, but not in the way anyone expected. He stepped closer, microphone poised, his voice suddenly calm and commanding. "You want me to prove myself? Fine, but let's do it properly. Not fists, not insults. No, darling, music. That's what this night is about. That's what makes me who I am." The crowd cheered, clapping and stomping in agreement. Freddie held the microphone out to Dave again. "So here's my proposition. You think you can do better? Show us. Right here, right now. You and me. A singing contest." The arena erupted. Gasps, laughter, shouts of disbelief. A singing contest? With Freddie Mercury? Dave's eyes widened. His bravado cracked. He stammered, I'm not here to sing. I'm here to—" "Oh, no, darling," Freddie interrupted, grinning like a king handing down judgment. You don't get to come into my house and dictate the rules. You wanted to challenge me? Then we do it my way." He turned to the band, who stared back in shock. Brian May's mouth hung open, guitar forgotten in his hands. Roger Taylor shook his head in disbelief. John Deacon raised his eyebrows as if to say, "Is he serious?" Freddie shot them a wicked grin. "Boys, give our guests a little accompaniment, won't you?" The crowd screamed, half in delight, half in anticipation. Dave stood frozen, suddenly realizing he was in way over his head. What do you want me to sing?" he stammered, his voice cracking. "Anything you like, darling," Freddie said, sweeping a hand grandly toward the audience. "This is your moment. All these people, waiting to hear your song. Don't waste it." The silence that followed was agonizing. Dave shifted his weight, swaying slightly, glancing nervously at the crowd. Some jeered. Others shouted encouragement. "Sing something, Dave. Show us what you've got." Finally, he blurted out, I'll sing, We Will Rock You." The arena exploded into laughter. People stomped their feet in familiar rhythm, clapping along. Freddie's smile widened into something both wicked and generous. "Oh, darling, you're going to challenge me with my own song? How delicious." He handed Dave the microphone. The drunk man gripped it tightly, his knuckles white, his hand shaking. The first beats of the stomps and claps grew louder, filling the space. "Go on, Dave," Freddie said softly, just loud enough for the mic to catch. "Show us your roar." Dave took a deep breath, puffed his chest, and belted out the first line, off-key, slurred, his voice cracking in the middle. The crowd roared with laughter and boos. Some buried their faces in their hands. Others howled with glee at the absurdity of it all. Dave faltered, his bravado slipping with each note. He stumbled through the next line, forgetting half the words, his voice drowning in the sheer size of the arena. And then something remarkable happened. Freddie stepped in beside him, clapping along, harmonizing on the words Dave missed. He leaned close, whispering lyrics in his ear, pushing him forward. He wasn't mocking him. He was lifting him, urging him to keep going. The crowd, stunned, began to shift. The laughter softened into encouragement. People started cheering Dave on, clapping louder, chanting the rhythm, shouting his name. For the first time that night, Dave wasn't just a heckler. He was part of the show. By the time he finished his stumbling verse, red-faced and panting, the arena gave him a thunderous round of applause. Not for his talent, but for his sheer audacity to try. Freddie took the microphone back, his arm draped casually over Dave's shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with theatrical flourish, "give it up for Dave, the bravest drunk in the arena." The cheers were deafening. Dave looked out at the sea of faces, cheering, clapping, smiling, and for the first time that night, his swagger melted into something else entirely. A shaky smile spread across his face. His chest heaved, his eyes wide with disbelief. And Freddie, standing beside him, leaned into the mic again, his voice booming with triumph. "You see, darling, that's what makes a man. Not tearing someone down, not spitting insults, standing up, even when you're terrified, and giving everything you've got." The crowd roared in agreement, stomping, clapping, chanting his name. Dave, overwhelmed, looked at Freddie, then at the audience. His bravado was gone, replaced by something raw, vulnerable, and very human. The heckler had been transformed. For a moment, the entire arena pulsed with energy that was no longer hostile, no longer fractured. It was unified again, but in a way nobody had anticipated. A few minutes ago, Dave had been the villain of the night, a drunk disrupting thousands of people, spitting insults at one of the greatest performers in history. Now, against all odds, the same crowd that booed him was clapping for him, cheering his name, giving him the kind of ovation most people only dream of. And Freddie Mercury was at the center of it, conducting the chaos like a maestro. He slung an arm around Dave's shoulders, pulling him closer to the mic. Freddie's smile was radiant, his presence so powerful that it seemed to shield Dave from the sea of judgment. "You see," Freddie said, his voice booming over the cheers. "Even a man who tried to tear me down has a voice worth hearing. That's the magic of music, darling." It forgives. It transforms. The arena erupted in applause. The stomping, the clapping. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was communion. Dave's eyes flickered, searching the crowd. He looked dazed, as if trying to reconcile what was happening with the man he'd been just minutes earlier. His breathing was heavy. His face, red from both alcohol and embarrassment, now flushed with something else entirely. Shame, maybe, or realization. Freddie sensed it. He always did. He turned to Dave, lowering his voice so it carried a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the theatrics before. "You've had your say, darling. Now tell me," Freddie tilted his head, his expression softening, "what brought you here tonight? What made you so angry?" The arena went silent. Dave froze, the microphone hovering inches from his lips. Thousands of eyes bore into him. His bravado, his drunken armor, was slipping fast. For the first time that night, his shoulders sagged. His voice cracked, barely audible. He swallowed hard, gripping the microphone tighter. "I lost my job last month." Gasps rippled through the arena. "My wife, she left me, took the kids." His voice faltered. He shook his head, looking down at his shoes, ashamed. "I just wanted somebody to notice me, to see me, to know I still mattered." The confession hit the crowd like a thunderclap. The boos and jeers died instantly. The energy shifted again, not to laughter, not to hostility, but to something quieter, something aching. 18,000 strangers, suddenly bound together by the raw pain spilling from a broken man under the spotlight. Freddie's expression softened completely. The teasing grin was gone. What remained was something gentler, more human. He reached out, resting a hand on Dave's shoulder. "Oh, darling," Freddie said, his voice heavy with compassion. "You do matter. You matter more than you know. To me, to them." He gestured to the sea of faces, to every soul in this room. The crowd erupted in cheers, not mocking, not derisive, but supportive. "You've got this, Dave," someone shouted. "We see you," cried another. Dave's eyes shimmered under the lights, tears forming against his will. He wiped at them clumsily with the back of his hand, but it was too late. His walls had crumbled. Freddie, ever the showman but also the healer, seized a moment. He raised the mic again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice commanding yet tender. "This man came here angry, hurting. He thought tearing someone down would ease his pain. But what he really needed, what we all need, is connection. And that, my darlings, is why we sing together." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then, with sudden brightness, he turned to the band. "Boys," he called, his eyes alight again, "let's get him something he can't forget." Roger tapped his sticks together. Brian's guitar hummed to life, and John's bass rumbled softly like a heartbeat. Freddie turned back to Dave with a mischievous grin. "Do you know this one, darling?" he asked. Then, without waiting for a reply, he launched into the opening line. "Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy?" The crowd exploded. Bohemian Rhapsody. Dave, eyes wide, shook his head. I can't." "Yes, you can," Freddie interrupted firmly. "You don't need a perfect voice. You just need heart." And so he coaxed Dave into singing the next line, even if it came out weak and trembling. Caught in a landslide, no escape from reality. The arena cheered, not because Dave sang well, he didn't, but because he tried. And Freddie sang alongside him, harmonizing, filling in the cracks, wrapping Dave's faltering voice in his own. When Dave faltered again, Freddie leaned close, whispering the words in his ear, guiding him through the verses. When Dave's voice broke, Freddie laughed, not at him, but with him, and carried the melody until Dave found the courage to keep going. By the time they reached the famous chorus, the crowd itself had joined in, their voices merging into one colossal choir. "Mama, oh," the sound was thunderous, overwhelming, transformative. Thousands of voices carrying the weight that Dave could not. And there he stood, the heckler, tears streaming down his face, his arm around Freddie Mercury, singing the most iconic song of Queen's career. Not as an enemy, but as part of the music. When the chorus ended, the band dropped the volume. leaving just Freddie and Dave at the mic. Freddie smiled warmly, squeezed Dave's shoulder, and whispered, audible through the mic, intimate despite the size of the arena. See, darling, the world doesn't need you to fight. It needs you to sing. The arena erupted in thunderous applause. Dave, overwhelmed, dropped his head, sobbing openly now. The tough facade, the drunken arrogance, all of it had melted away. What remained was a man broken but not alone, standing in the light with a legend who refused to humiliate him, who instead lifted him up. Freddie turned back to the crowd, raising the microphone high. Let this be a lesson, my darlings, he declared, his voice booming with regal authority. Even the loudest heckler is just a heart in need of song. The ovation shook the walls. People stamped their feet, clapped their hands, roared until their throats were raw. And there, in the middle of it all, Freddie Mercury wrapped his arms around Dave, holding him steady as the weight of 18,000 voices lifted him higher than he had ever been in his life. The ovation seemed endless. 18,000 people were on their feet, roaring until the sound rattled the rafters, stomping and clapping as if to keep the moment alive forever. The stage lights glared like suns, illuminating a sight nobody in the arena would ever forget. Freddie Mercury, arms wrapped around the same man who had once threatened to ruin the night, holding him as if he were a long-lost brother. Dave's body shook with sobs. The drunken arrogance that had fueled his outburst was gone, burned away by the heat of the spotlight and the fire of Freddie's compassion. He clung to the microphone as though it were an anchor, his tears glistening in the stage light. Freddie leaned close, his voice low, but still carried by the microphone. You see, darling, he said gently, strength isn't about tearing someone down. It's about standing here, vulnerable, and letting yourself be seen. That's courage. The crowd erupted again, their cheers rolling like thunder. Freddie raised Dave's arm high in the air as if he were the champion of the night. The man who had walked into the arena as a heckler was leaving it as something else entirely, a symbol of redemption. Freddie released him and stepped back, raising his own microphone with dramatic flourish. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed, tonight you have witnessed something more powerful than any song. You've seen a man just like you, just like me, dare to bare his soul. That is the true magic of music. It unites us. It heals us. It makes us human. The audience roared. People cried. People hugged. People looked at one another with faces lit by the realization that they had shared in something extraordinary, something that went far beyond rock and roll. Freddie, always attuned to the pulse of a crowd, let the cheers swell before lifting his hand for silence. Slowly, the noise ebbed, leaving a hushed anticipation. Dave, Freddie said, turning back to him, you matter, not because you fought your way up here, but because you showed us your truth. And to everyone here tonight, remember this. There are no strangers in music, only voices waiting to be heard. The crowd erupted again, louder than ever before. Freddie gestured to the band, his face breaking into that mischievous grin once more. Now, boys, he said, let's finish this properly. And with that, Queen launched into We Are the Champions. The timing was perfect, the symbolism undeniable. Freddie sang with fiery conviction, his voice soaring above the arena, every note sharp with emotion. But this time, he wasn't singing only to his adoring fans. He was singing to Dave, to the broken man who had stumbled into the arena angry and unseen, and now stood in front of thousands, held aloft by the very people he thought despised him. When Freddie belted out the iconic line, "No time for losers, 'cause we are the champions," he turned and pointed directly at Dave, pulling him close so the entire arena could see. The crowd erupted, singing the line with him, stamping their feet, tears streaming down faces. Dave, overwhelmed, lifted his trembling arm in triumph. He was no longer the drunk heckler. For that one shining moment, he was a champion too. By the time the song ended, the arena was vibrating with catharsis. The final chords echoed into silence, leaving only the sound of 18,000 voices chanting Freddie's name, over and over. Freddie leaned into the mic one last time. Remember this night, darlings. Remember that love is louder than hate, that compassion is stronger than cruelty, and that every broken soul deserves a song. The ovation shook the building. Dave was escorted gently from the stage. not by security dragging him out, but by crew members guiding him like an honored guest. The audience applauded him as he went, clapping his back, shaking his hand, treating him not as a villain but as a man redeemed. For Freddie, it was more than showmanship. It was proof that music could turn even the darkest moment into light. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.